My best childhood friend Joe and I grew up in Ohio in the 70s and were outside all the time we could manage it. Joe lived on a farm that bordered a pretty big forest, and my parents would drop me off in the morning and we'd stay in the woods all weekend. Something we loved to do was walk the railroad tracks out in the country. After high school, me and Joe both left home but always stayed in touch and tried to coordinate visits so we'd see each other occasionally. One night, me and Joe got to talking about our railroad trips as kids. Nostalgia hit, and soon we decided to take a day, walk the rails, camp one night, and walk home. The day came. We started out early in the morning. We had my wife drop us off in our old spot where we used to start, right outside our hometown. She thought this was absolutely crazy and made sure to mention it. When she pulled away, we actually took the opposite direction of the tracks, just to be adventurous. We knew the land well. We had a map, so off we set. Before night started to set in, we picked a spot to camp. It was a thick forested area, trees on every side of the train tracks, so you felt like you were in a tunnel. We had brought small hammocks to sleep on, but before we set them up, we decided to do a little scouting of the perimeter. We figured if we didn't see anything from on top of this short hill, we'd be fine. But when we got to the top, we saw an old building down at the bottom, about 100 yards into the woods. From where we were, there didn't look to be anyone in it either. All was quiet. No movement could be seen. No lights. We decided to walk a little closer just to make sure. We came down the hill very slowly, and as we neared the building, we saw it wasn't a sugar shack at all. It was an old church. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. A cross still stood on top of the place, weathered black. None of the windows had glass, and there were no doors, just open doorways. We got close enough to see inside. There were rows of pews and a built-up section in front for a preacher to stand. We didn't go all the way in. We didn't want to. Beyond all that, there was no sign of anyone else. No footprints, no paths, no roads. It was an abandoned church. We left immediately and went back up the hill to our spot we had picked to camp. Having a hill between us and the church made us feel better, but we were still a little uneasy. We chalked it up to the natural creepiness seeing a church in the middle of the woods would elicit. Besides, at this point it was dusk, and we just decided to rig up our hammocks and go to sleep and move on at early morning. Night set in, and as we lay in our hammocks hanging out, we began to hear something in the direction of the church. Our conversation about it went a little like this. "Do you hear that? What is that?" It sounds like people singing. And it did sound just like singing. We both slid right out of our hammocks and hunkered down, straining to hear more. We listened for a minute or two, and the singing continued, but it wasn't getting louder. Finally, we decided to creep back up the hill and see if we could spy where the sound was coming from. The moon was barely out, but it provided enough light so you wouldn't walk right into a tree, but it was near pitch black. We didn't use flashlights as we crept slowly up the hill, and we didn't talk. When we got to the top, we saw light in the distance. It was coming from the church, and the singing was coming from inside. The light looked to be candlelight from the way it flickered, and though we tried, we couldn't make out what was being sung. It sounded like church music, but in another language. We sat and watched for a while, trying to see who was in there, but we only saw occasional shadows. We had no intention of getting closer either. We had about a football field length between us, and we aimed to keep it that way. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but this voice thoroughly scared everything out of me. It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you see in movies, but again it was like he was speaking in a different language because we couldn't understand a single word. Eventually it got to where the single male voice would say something and then a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted for a while and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that just kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears. Then it stopped. At this point I was just getting ready to say, "Let's seriously get out of here," when Joe put a hand on my shoulder and hissed, "They're coming out." We were far enough away that we couldn't make them out really well, but what we could see was a line of figures walk out the open doorway, all holding hands in single file. We could see some of them had flashlights. They began to sing again, and the light from the flashlights began to move toward us in the hill. We booked it back down to our campsite, grabbed our stuff, and ran to the tracks. Once there, we ran down the tracks in the direction we had come from. After a few minutes, we stopped and looked back. We saw lights coming down the hill. They were moving erratically, like whoever was holding them was shaking them. We continued to run in spurts until eventually we stopped seeing the lights and came to a road. By our map, we knew a small town was about 15 minutes down it, and we walked there, got to a 24-hour gas station, and called my wife to come get us. Shortly after high school, some friends and I drove to a national park, which had a campground, but we decided to camp outside the grounds so we wouldn't have to worry about disturbing other campers. We set everything up in a clearing next to a bushy slope, got a fire going, and we cracked open some beers. Around 10 p.m., we suddenly hear people walking downhill through the bush towards our camp. This puts us on our guard, but we weren't too concerned because it's a popular park, and we figure it's just more campers. We all keep our eyes trained towards the sounds, and soon enough the people arrive at the bottom of the slope, but they don't cross the tree line into the clearing. They just stop in a huddle, and it's hard to make out the details, but it looks like there's about 6 figures. All of them are dressed in white, and the moonlight reflecting off the garments gives them an eerie glow. My friend Dee tries to ease the tension and calls out to the group, "Hey, how's it going?" They don't reply. Dee keeps calling out to them, but they don't reply. Eventually, one of the figures emerges from the tree line and walks towards us. He stops just beyond the light from our fire and stands there staring down at us. "How long will you be here for?" he asks, really low and slow so we can't make out his accent or tone, but he certainly doesn't sound friendly. I blurted out that we were leaving first thing tomorrow morning. My friends murmur agreement and the guy says nothing, but just keeps staring down at us. I notice his clothes in more detail now. As mentioned, they were all white, and the top was kind of like a loose, plain baseball jersey, only made from a thin, cotton-like material. This is odd, because the night is cool enough that I can see the man's breath. He just keeps staring, and I can hear the other people from his group shuffling in their spot behind the tree line. Finally, the man speaks again. "You're leaving tomorrow morning." It's not a question, so we all agree. Apparently satisfied, the man turns away and walks back to his group. They all start making their way back up the slope. My friends and I say very little until we can't hear the group anymore, and even when they're totally out of earshot, we speak in nervous whispers. We finally got up really early in the morning and left immediately because we kept hearing noises all around our tents the whole time. We're trekking back to the car park. The sensation of being watched never leaves us. Once we're loaded into the car and on the road, we finally relax. We go over it all, kind of excited in a weird way considering different theories, occult, Satanists. But would Satanists dress in all white? It was almost amusing. When we were out of any danger, we stop at the town nearest the park. We pull into the petrol station for snacks, and the guy manning the counter looks like a bit of a hard arse, but we chat a bit, and he's friendly enough. We tell him about running into some weird people last night in the park. He makes us explain in detail what happened. After he's heard our story, I expect him to laugh it off, but he doesn't laugh. He gets all quiet and narrows his eyes. He just tells us we were really lucky that night, and that right there is the scariest part of the story. I've always loved yard sales. About 2 years ago, I was just driving around looking for yard sale signs, gradually going further out into the rural country and enjoying the scenery. I saw a yard sale sign off of the road, next to a big rock with something religious carved into it. Anyways, I figure it's probably got some good stuff if it's a church organization, so I decided to go. I turned my new Jeep down the long, narrow gravel driveway, and the trees open up to a clearing with a really beautiful white house. They have long tables spread out with folded clothes, kids' toys, etc., but nothing I was really interested in. There are probably 30 people milling about on the property, all wearing these gray jumpsuits. Okay. The only other person that seemed to be browsing was this old man, whose truck was also parked there, but we were the only ones, save for gray jumpsuits. The woman at the makeshift table with the money box on it begins talking to me as I'm preparing to leave. I stride over to her for a friendly chat, and I notice that behind the house, there are probably 10 or so small gray buildings that gray jumpsuits are going in and out of. After some casual chat, she notices me staring. Yes, we all live here, it's great. Hey, would you like to come in and learn more? She had this crazy light in her eyes, and I attempted to mumble an excuse when she nodded at 3 guys who had been arranging stuff on the tables, moving tables, etc., and they all came to stand around me. Really, come inside. We preach peace and the word of God. You'd really like it. She took my hand and started tugging me towards the house. All the while, these guys are following. Then, the old man browsing paperbacks comes up. He looks at the woman and says, "Sorry, ma'am, we both really gotta be going. I don't think she's interested." The woman looks shocked, but lets my hand go, and the guys step back. He's a scrawny old guy, and I'm a petite woman, but that bad arse of an old man grabs my arm and hustles me over to my Jeep. As I'm thanking him and yelling back to the people to have good luck with their yard sale, he mutters in a low voice, "You really need to get out of here." My hands are shaking. All the gray jumpsuits are just turned and silently staring at us, and I'm fumbling with my keys. The old man stands by my rolled-down window, and I fumble to start the car and try to back out of the narrow gravel driveway. I tried to do a 3-point turn, but my car slides down in the gravel into a shallow ditch next to the driveway, and I'm panicking. "Just take it easy, put it in 4-wheel drive," he coaxes. "I don't know how," I whisper frantically. He guided me as I finally got the Jeep to stop sinking into the gravel and drove the out of there. I yelled a thank you to him, and he nodded before getting into his truck. I told my family and a few friends, who kinda laughed and brushed it off, saying they hadn't heard of any cults in this area, probably just a church sale at one of the members' houses. I've driven around that area a little bit after the event, but haven't seen the rock sign thing again. I think I may have escaped a cult that is kind of off the radar, but I swear it happened, and good thing that old man helped me get out of there.